Hello and welcome to the El Monitor podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Kepel, where each month we take a deep dive with authors and thought leaders who are shaping the way we think about this complex and dynamic region. I'm your host, Gilles Kepel, and today we're recording from the library of Institut du Monde Arabe, the Institute of the Arab World in Paris, which has in display one of the biggest collections of modern Arab literature in Europe. Today, I have the great pleasure and honor to host a very, very special guest, Mr. Orhan Pamuk, recipient of the Nobel Prize for Literature on the occasion of the publication of his latest novel, Veba Geceleri in Turkish, The Nights of the Plague, which just came out in Turkish, in French, and is now out in English. Welcome, Orhan Pamuk.
Very pleased to be here.
Merhaba, Orhan Bey,
Yes.
Paris'ta.
Yes.
So, dear Orhan Pamuk, your latest novel, The Nights of the Plague, Veba Geceleri in Turkish, is set in the fictional island of Mingeria, located somewhere off-roads in the eastern Mediterranean in the very beginning of the 20th century. Sultan Abdulhamid reigns in Istanbul, and he sends on a diplomatic mission to China the newlywed daughter of his deposed brother, together with her husband. He's a European-educated medical doctor and an epidemiologist. As their vessel makes a stopover in Alexandria, the doctor and his wife are sent back to Mingeria, where the first symptoms of plague are being perceived, in order to take the necessary prophylactic measures to put it to a halt. Through the prism of the disease and its overarching effects, you depict an extraordinary moment during the twilight of the Ottoman Empire, when the new and the old worlds collided, where the coexistence of the Muslim Turks and Orthodox Greeks was ruined by exacerbated nationalism, until self-styled local leaders proclaimed independence, a bloody and paroxysmal caricature of chauvinistic regimes that have plagued, so to speak, the region since then. Before we get deeper into that extraordinary book and relate it to your previous work, one question burns every reader's lips. You started writing the novel in 2016, 4 years before the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic. But your fictional Mingeria 1901 plague strikes back for us as a metaphor of present-day COVID, if only because both have exacerbated intense social, cultural, and international tensions, tipping the global world order as it was known then and also as it is perceived nowadays. In this regard, I would like you to elaborate for us on this following quotation from the Goncourt brothers, who created in the year 1902, while your fiction was actually unfolding, this famous French literary prize that bears their name, the Goncourt Prize. History is a novel that occurred. A novel is history that might have been. So they wrote. Where does Veba Geceleri fit into that perspective?
First of all, let me salute Goncourt brothers, who were really the great diarists. And we can have the texture of daily life of literary salons of Paris through them. So I nod to them first. Then I also, my most popular question I've been asked, so you were writing this novel, Mr. Pamuk, for the last 4 years. Suddenly, the coronavirus epidemic and pandemic started. Said, who would read your plague book? It's passé, it's past. Then suddenly they begin calling me, you're lucky. Well, people may think that I wrote the novel after epidemic, that I didn't want them to think. So I wrote a long essay published in New York Times and Liberation and all over the world. Then my publishers began calling me and sending me emails, Orhan, please finish your novel. Everyone was in lockdown. So I intensely worked and did not change much in the sense that, I don't want to refer to what's happening today, but it's inevitable that I have seen, I've read so many books, PhDs on the subject of organization and imposition of quarantine. Whenever there is a pandemic, first they deny, then there is gossip, and then there is either anarchy or chaos, or a strong government comes and they detest the government, but actually that strong government finishes and controls the pandemic. Then there are uprisings. So I thought, wow, this is such a social novel. Actually, I begin to think about 40 years ago, a plague novel for metaphysical reasons, death, individuality, of course related to the fact that they refer to Muslims as fatalistic. They don't take it seriously. They consider plague or any pandemic as a sort of a punishment from God because of their sins. For 20 years, my mind was busy about that. That also passed. Later, I discovered the third pandemic, which started in the last decade of 19th century, and this was the time of decline of empires and Ottoman Empire, and I decided to set my novel there. Partly because the dominant pandemic in 19th century was cholera rather than plague. So there were cholera quarantine uprisings in Poland and Russia. And I thought this time I want to write Tolstoyan social novel with a pretext of plague. An isolated place. In isolation, Daniel Defoe discovered in Robinson Crusoe, history moves fast, and you can see the dramatical movements. Actually, what French people had experienced in 200 years, my characters, my Mingar Island experiences in 20 months.
And following up on that, it so happened that during the early summer of 2020, I was tasked here in France to investigate how and why in some quote-unquote Muslim areas in the outskirts of Paris, there was so much resistance to state sanitary measures, to quarantines, etc., against COVID-19. So with my team, we observed that the number of Salafi imams explained to their flock that what you said, that either the virus was sent by Allah to punish sinners and all that medication was useless, and that prayer and congregation and under the auspices of those very imams was the only path to salvation on earth and in the hereafter. Though many of the congregants were young, they were French-born, they were educated in our secular schools. So I was struck when I read your book, and I noticed that some sheikhs or dervish monasteries in the Muslim quarters of the Mingaria held exactly the same kind of sermons that like the ones I heard in the French banlieues, and they translated likewise into power politics. Would you say that history repeats itself, or is it that in spite of many of the hopes of that very 20th century that opens with your novel, which starts in 1900, we're back to some underground basics that go much deeper than many idealistic leaders and ideologues had thought?
Believe me, Gilles, I don't have a straight-cut answer for that. For so many years, for 20 years, when I decided to base my plague novel about this subject of Muslims being being fatalists, kaderci, they don't take measures, they don't believe. It is the plague or the bacteria or virus comes from God. There is some truth to that, but there is also something that I want to argue against essentializing this attitude as inherent in Islam. I don't think it's Islam, but it's more education and local politics. Once there is such a social event and government is doing things that they did not do before, whatever the group, of course, Islami cemaatler, Islamic groups would find this as an excuse to assert their political power. But they may not believe in it. They may not be kaderci, they may not be fatalist, but it's a good opportunity to grab some power and say to the government, hey, I'm not listening to you. It's not important what I privately think. You know, in the novel, I have a little sheikh who says, don't believe it comes from, but he takes measures himself very privately. So it's very complicated matter, and once Muslims feel they are oppressed, they took every opportunity to fight back and not to listen to the government's orders or whatever's. So yes, there is truth in that Muslims, compared to Western civilization, 16th century, 17th century, all the travelers wrote whenever there's plague in Istanbul, they said, oh, they don't take measures. The Christians went to the Prince's Islands and Muslims stayed. And there are narratives. I have friends who wrote books about history of plagues in Muslim countries. I've read text where the guy is such a good guy and wants to only to follow his religion and forget about religion, wants to be nice, running from funeral to funeral, crying and eating and probably spreading the sickness around. But look at he's also a memoirist like Conquer Brothers, and look at this text. He is not aware of anything. And then you think it's education, that knowing that this is contagious. Then you say, well, how come the Westerners know? How aren't they? So it's very problematical. I don't have single answers. And once the American novelist F. Scott Fitzgerald said, if you have contradictory ideas strong in your head, you don't have answers for, it's a good start for a novel.
Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you like this podcast and care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's other audio series, On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalevi and Amberin Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspi. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
So let's get into the book now more deeply. When a book which I liked immensely, I have to say, if only because we get back deep into the history of the region, and we've lived all over the last decades with those views that Orientalists painted things like they should not have painted them and the like. And I found that your book was a great antidote to an ideological view at the history of the region, and using sources from the ground, from the local people, and it paints a great picture. So it's not only a great book of fiction, I think it's also a book for thoughts. But let's go back to your island of Mingaria. I hear that some people take it seriously, and one lady here said to you, oh, so where is this island? Because I would like to go there on holiday. So it's great because fiction becomes truth. So when the island of Mingaria becomes independent in the course of the novel, after the plague and whatever, I won't tell the story because I want people to read your book, as a consequence of the ineptitude of the Ottoman system and of its bureaucracy to cope with the challenge of the plague, it all starts up in earnest, this independence issue. But soon enough, this island of utopia, because utopia was an island, turns into dystopia, into a nightmare. The very slogans that carried freedom, identity, rationality become the sheer justification of authoritarianism, dictatorship, political murders, and they become null and void. I noticed that after the publication of the novel, you were sued by some ultranationalists in Turkey for ridiculing the Turkish flag and insulting Ataturk because they thought there was a resemblance because Major Kamil, who's the autocrat in the book, the tough leader, and Kemal Ataturk. Though in the afterword by the fictional narrator, who's supposedly the great-granddaughter of the Ottoman princess, who's your main character, she reiterates the old longing for freedom that's, at the start of the independence, as if, in spite of the betrayal of such ideals, those ideals still retain their validity for today, when the narratives of political Islam has become the new speech of the powers that be.
Okay.
Something you mentioned in your novel Snow also, to some extent. Right?
First, look at all the so-called post-colonial nations and small nations in Middle East and in Africa, in Asia, and more or less the promise of liberation and that is attached to independence from the empire is based on nationalism. This also comes along with the king, the Shah, Padishah is dead, so the shadow of God is not there anymore. So you have to invent a new myth, a secular myth. My novel is about that. Whether the post-colonial independent nations kept their promise of freedom or free open society, let's put Karl Popper's words, is problematical. I don't think they did. Turkey is no different. But in the end, I did not intend to ridicule Turkish Turkish story of Turkish Republic, neither Kemal Atatürk. In a way, I wrote a sort of representative story of all in small nations after the fall of big empires, their problems, their political problems, and of course, my intention was to demystify the secular myths, legends that are invented after the a king or the padishah or a shah or the kaiser vanishes. You need them, but you also need a novelist to show how fragile, how humane, how ironical all these myths that teach you at high school, and all the people who had believed very highly in what they have read in high school texts in Turkey. Some of them were upset. In the end, they wrote so many complaint letters to public prosecutor who invited me to his office. There is pressure on me implying, so I am investigating you, what do you say? And I said, Mr. Prosecutor, which page? And there was, even in letters of informing letters, there was no page number. In fact, I wrote more an allegory of national identity or what happens when God's system, God's shadow disappears. Where do we find meaning in life? In the end, you have to find a motivation to send people to do their military service and shoot each other. They used to kill each other for the Padishah, for the shadow of God. So now they kill each other or they repress each other for the flag, for the nation. That is the new sacred thing. It's my ironical way of pointing that out. So I must confess, my novel this time has, maybe like my other novels, has educative teaching stance or teaching attitude about history of the nations, secular nations, so forth and so on.
But it is nevertheless based on what Umberto Eco called the fictional pact, that he mentioned.
Yes.
After Rushdie's novel was criticized, vilified, and the like, he made this remark that, readers who attacked the book for blasphemy did not mention the page, just the statue.
Yes.
Now, I would like to put Veba Geceleri in perspective with some of your other books, with your more than the 20 books that you have published. Would it be fair to say that while your novels My Name is Red, published in 1998, as well as Istanbul from 2002, or The Museum of Innocence 2008, carried the nostalgia of a history that might have been, to quote the Goncourt brothers? This last book is far more concerned with the actual present day's issues in Turkey and its neighboring states due to the adverse sequels of the history that was.
Okay, I've been asked so many times, both by the Turkish media and press and international press, sir, is so-and-so Kemal Atatürk, or Sami Pasha, is Tayyip Erdogan, is your novel allegorical? And my standard answer is, even if my novel were allegorical and symbolical, would I be telling you that? Then it would be foolish to write the novel. Then I would say that in an interview. Yes, a novelist does so many things simultaneously, and that what lends the art of the novel, its complexity and richness. Yes, there is an allegorical side to my novel, while on the other hand, let's take another plague novel, Albert Camus. He is not realistic about imposition of quarantine. Also, I proudly say that I research, and my novel pays attention to problems of, our problems today are the same. How do we impose quarantine? People demand simultaneously two things. This is what I've learned writing this novel 5 years, reading about plague and pandemics. Humanity wants two things simultaneously. They first say, hey, government, you probably bought this pandemic, collaborating with our enemies. Stop it. It's your job to stop it. My sister died. Other people are dying. I'm scared. Stop it, government. Then the same people say, hey, government, don't touch my business. Don't touch my liberties. Don't touch what I do. And again, they say, stop it. Okay? So it's impossible to find one single source of evil in all this complex thing. Writing a novel, I'm not that kind of a historical novelist that's pointing out the victims, the good people, bad people. In fact, I believe in Tolstoy, who says, if a character is too bad, make him a bit good. If a character is too good, make him a bit bad. I wanted to perhaps draw a huge panoramic picture of decline of Ottoman Empire. Perhaps one part of my mind was saying to my readers that, yes, there is Ottomanism in Turkey, Erdogan and his party putting on Ottoman Empire and its details, and culture on a pedestal. Yes, I too like Ottoman Empire, but don't forget, empires decline. Empires produce people like Sami Pasha, who's whipping everyone, putting everyone in prison. So that's, in a way, my novel is both about the psychology of any pandemic, how one feels alone, how, as if the old myths, the God is not there, everyone is dying pointlessly, and also the details of daily life followed by daily objects. The be also, as in all of my novels, paying attention to beauties of life too. That's why I choose an Eastern Mediterranean island, because I like Greek islands, Turkish Mediterranean islands. I've been there. I like small islands. There is also heartfelt, personal color in the book.
Well, this is precisely where I wanted you to come, because after completing such an in-depth and wide-ranging historical novel, which, as I said earlier, I found to be an extraordinarily illuminating tour de force that dives deep back into the past, so as to uproot and interpret the vagaries of today and tomorrow, I understood from some of your previous interviews that you were now refocusing on the self and exploring in the book you are presently writing how the 2006 Nobel Prize winner for literature would have liked actually to be a painter, a craft that could only develop in the Muslim lands thanks to the cultural blend with Europe. Could you let us know how and why you managed to navigate the gap between your intimacy and the big picture in your fictional work?
I believe that the art of the novel works best if the writer, he or she, writes in such a manner that the reader thinks it's not autobiographical, it's objective, he's writing from outside, or sometimes the reader thinks that he's only talking about himself. In fact, when the writer talks about himself, the best way the reader thinks he's talking about others, and when he talks about others, everyone thinks that if he writes well, he is writing autobiographically. This is about the way of telling. Then there is also the mood. I also believe that there are writers like Kafka, for example. For them, literature is self-expression. I also want to write like Kafka, forgetting anything social details, just an allegory, very humane, heartfelt self-expression. Then I also want to write like Tolstoy, a huge panoramic picture, every single detail accurately done and very representative. I am this kind of ambitious novelist. There are chapters that I write in the mood of Kafka, more self-expression, and there are chapters or books that I write in the mood of Tolstoy, but using different techniques from Kafka and Tolstoy. Now my next novel would be the story of an failed Turkish artist, because I consider myself like that. I wanted to be a painter, and this is accepted by my family. That's why I studied like Le Corbusier architecture, both to be a painter and an architect. It didn't work out. But now I want to write my would-have-been story through the eyes of one single person. But I should say, I know that you're not worried. Don't worry. It will be, in the end, Tolstoyan. I will write the Kafkaesque single. In my interior voice would be balanced by the big picture. For me, writing a novel is identifying with your characters, but then taking a distance like an editor, then putting it in a frame which will lend the whole thing, the whole picture, a deeper, a depth that you cannot calculate at the beginning.
So in order to encourage you to go back to this architectural ambition, we invited you not in the Le Corbusier building, but in this Jean Nouvel architecture of the Institut du Monde Arabe. Actually, last month, Jean Nouvel was sitting in this chair where you're sitting.
Yes, I know about that.
And but I had not anticipated that we would play a role in your future career or in the fiction of your future career, in the fictional. So, dearest Orhan Pamuk, thank you very much. Çok teşekkürler for joining us today on Reading the Middle East, and thanks to you all for listening. I will be back in a few weeks with another one of the top authors and thought leaders in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you.
İyi
Thank
akşamlar.
you. İyi akşamlar. I also enjoyed doing this. Thank you.
And güle güle.
Bye bye.
Allah ısmarladık. If you have not done so already, please sign up for Reading the Middle East and El Monitor's other podcasts on the Middle East with Andrew Parasiliti and Amerin Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit on your favorite podcast platform.